Welcome to Live from Plato's Cave. I am Mario Veen. This is episode 27, Michel Serres Philosophy with Aldo Houterman. Show me your interpretation of the cave allegory and I will tell you what your philosophical perspective is. Today we will discuss the philosophy of Michel Serres, a French philosopher who passed away in 2019. In Serres' version of the allegory, there is not one sun, but many stars, and the people in the cave do not want to leave it, but marvel at its beauty. Serres was, among other things, a mountaineer, a rugby player, a mathematician, a teacher, and an interdisciplinary philosopher. He philosophized on many topics ranging from sports and social media to ecology and education. It's telling that the dedication of his book Variations on the Body reads as follows. To my gym teachers, my trainers and mountain guides who taught me how to think. Our mountain guide today, through Plato's allegory of the cave and the philosophy of Michel Serres, is Aldo Houterman. Aldo teaches medical ethics and philosophy at the Amsterdam University Medical Center and is doing his PhD at the ESPRIT Center for Sports, Integrity and Transition at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. His book We Are Our Body is about the meaning of the body, sports and movement for human existence. His area of research is the philosophy of the body. How is the body regarded in sports, in healthcare or in science? Which body images prevail in top sports and which ideas about the body are sustainable? In his research, Aldo uses the interdisciplinary philosophy of Michel Serres. Aldo is also an avid cyclist and a member of the ethical committee of the Cyclist Union in the Netherlands. So, here we are.
Hi.
Hi. We were speaking a little bit before about how to start, right? With Michel Serres is a kind of a difficult question.
Yeah.
But maybe we can start with where we are. Can you describe where we are right now, where we are sitting?
Yeah, we are in Rotterdam, so near the central station, in the Douwe Egberts Café. Mm-hmm. So it's in a sort of aquarium, sort of fish tank.
Yeah, we're in a fish tank in a cafe because... Yeah, we were looking for a public space because now I have the possibility to do these live instead of via Zoom, which is really good. But that means, well, I prefer actually to look for a public space, but that's quite difficult in our society. And I think this is great because it's like they call it a meeting room. And I was able to make a reservation, but I couldn't do it through the website. I had to go to the bar. And so we have the space for about 2 hours, but it's a glass space. So like we see these people like they're looking very serious, right? they're on their laptops and everything like that. Yeah. Yeah. So would Michel Serres have anything to say about this?
Yeah, more like so the people working on the laptop and busy with their mobile phones. So that is an important theme in his work. So how to think of the network generation and the network society. Mm-hmm. So in this sense he's also very so most philosophers are very skeptical about this, so that it leads to individualization, mm-hmm. towards atomization, towards not having real contact with the world anymore. So I'm also a bit of sympathetic to these ideas, but I found in Michel Serres sort of counterbalance. So Serres is really hopeful about these developments. So that is why I find it interesting. So I wouldn't say he is right in this case, but his his philosophy gives some sort of other perspective on how to think about this, and maybe we can pick some things out of this philosophy that we can use for for thinking of societal trends. Yeah.
And I guess also thinking about society now, right? Because there's right now a particular configuration of actually the situation we're in right now. We're recording a podcast.
Yeah.
You have your laptop there. I just joined Mastodon today. We connected there.
Yeah, me too.
And people are working here. But so basically this is a shared space, but people are in their own bubble, but it's not a vacuum bubble. I can hear the music from, I don't know if people listening to that hear it, but I hear some music from the cafe. And that's kind of like, in Dutch we would say gezellig too, right?
Yeah. So one thing, a term that comes up with the philosophy of Michel Serres is also noises and rumors. So that is an important philosophical concept of his throughout his whole work, beginning in the 1960s, but also for thinking about late societal trends. So how should we deal with rumors and noises everywhere, and how can we filter these, and how should we filter these rumors, and how to make sort of music out of this noise. Mm-hmm. And Serres is also a very musical thinker, so he wanted to be a musician at the beginning, but he wasn't talented enough. So there's also in his work there are a lot of reflections on music, but not music as a sort of stylistic cultural thing, but music that you can find everywhere. So for example in forests, for example the noises that you hear there, or when you are in the mountain, or and also the noises that you hear at sea, for example from the waves. And also noises that you hear in a cafe and that you hear in a classroom when you, as a teacher, hear these noises of the chairs and of the students chatting to each other. So, and he is, his aim is to discover some music in these all these kind of noises. And and the idea is then. So the internet generation or the mobilized society is not something in which individualization is important, but also the noises that we make towards each other. So we are communicating through these noises. And sometimes it can be really horrifying. We can be horrified by noise. So for example by car noise or some motor engines making noise, and then we want to get away. Yeah? But to some noises we are also open, so that gather our interest, gather our attention. Yeah, there's noise everywhere. So how should we relate to them? How should we filter all these noises? That is an important theme, and it is also typical of the network society. So he says, so we become more and more listeners as opposed to viewers, for example.
Yeah, it reminds me of 2 episodes ago. I was speaking with Mike Huiskes about conversation analysis. And one of the steps that Harvey Sachs did, who started the conversation analysis, he started to... so people were studying language, but they were studying like formalized language, like could you pass me the hammer or something like that. But that's not how people speak in general. But at this time, sociologists and other social scientists, they didn't want to study that, let alone philosophers, because they said, well, that's too chaotic, too noise. But his kind of premise was, it was about what do we regard as data in our research. His premise was there is order at all levels. So I know personally I speak a lot like but there's even a pattern to when you say to how people interrupt, to all the things like that. And so I guess someone at sea, the noise of the sea, if you're a sailor, you are able also to distinguish, the sea is friendly today or something like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and it also links to Serres as well. So what can be noises for one can be music for others, and also depending on your emotional state, for example. So then you wouldn't love to hear music that you normally listen to. And what Sarah is also saying is that not only human-like persons speak language or make noise, but that is what nature does in fact. So long before there was human language, there were already volcanoes, oceans making noise, for example, and birds, for example. So he really tries to integrate these natural phenomena, so pre-human phenomena, into his philosophy. And this also gives him the tools to also think about technology, I would say. So that is right. We can think of technology as something that is that comes with culture, that comes with human culture, but also this dependence on noises and the ability so for example, machines also make noise, for example, and also the phones and the laptops make signals, right? And signals and noises.
So not just the auditory noise, but also the radiation.
Yes,
electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, so then the noise becomes more like a model. So it's not, doesn't need to be auditory, but can also be, so frills, for example, and shakes, for example, vibrations, So that somehow our body translates this into signals for danger, for example, or for attention,
Well, this already clarifies something for me about Serres, because I confessed to you already that I didn't read anything by him. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of also a new thing for a podcast, because usually I try to read a lot. And I thought, okay, what if I don't read? And I just try to find out from you kind of an introduction to Serres. And so usually you go to the Wikipedia and all that. Yeah. With most philosophers, you get kind of an idea about, well, this is kind of their approach. Yeah. But with Serres, not so much. But if you say that for him noise is so important, and you start with noise, and you start, well, if noise is interesting to you, then everything is interesting to you. So that explains can give you my impression, which is that he is interested. We should say he was, because he passed away in 2019.
Yes,
very recent, and he's interested in understanding the world, and the world as it comes to you, as it kind of presents itself to you. So rather than sitting in a room and thinking about, I want to understand the ethics of climate change or whatever, I picked, so I don't really know him, but so you have to tell me if it's wrong. I picture him just walking on the street and noticing that people are using smartphones, and then thinking about that, and then connecting it with other things, and then writing a book about that.
So what I really liked about, so that's good that you picked it up. I think this is also an important theme, and so there's a lot of other themes than noise in his work. But so one thing I would say, what he tries to develop throughout his whole work is a sort of notion that he sometimes described as global intuition. So this is also a bit of contradictory. So we think of intuition as something that is subjective, right? And so there's also the global into this. So rather than developing knowledge as a sort of standard idea of what is philosopher's knowledge or wisdom, he has this idea of, so my philosophy is not about being right, but about developing an intuition.
Right.
So what is that? What can we say about intuition? So in his notebooks, which were published a couple of months ago, on one page he writes something like, "I'd like to philosophize as a tennis player." So it's like attentive, inventive, alert, wakeful. So his philosophy is about reaching toward new intuitions. So the world is changing, and also our wisdom or our intuition about the world should be changing. So the interesting idea about intuition, I think, it's more corporal. So it's more about so there's something that you do with your whole body. So it doesn't need to be academic. So that's why I'm also interested in sports, for example. How, what kind of intuitions do athletes have, for example? But you can also think about, so about doctors, for example. So what kind of intuitions do they have? And it's about sensitivity and sensibility more than, so the intellectualist tradition, or the cognitivist tradition, that knowledge or wisdom resides in our head.
So then a doctor would have different knowledge, and an athlete would have different knowledge, and also a different body maybe. So do doctors kind of live in a different world than athletes? I mean, generalizing. They have a different intuition about, do they perceive the world differently? So this is also a bit of phenomenological insight, so that you get skilled to a certain world. You have this idea of the banker that is skilled into the banking world, for example, or the athletes. But I think so. So this would be a distinction between worlds. And what Serres is aiming at, and this is that, so what is the overlap between those worlds? So for example, how can... The athlete has an injury and goes to visit the doctor. But also, what can an athlete learn to a philosopher about how the world is structured? Or what is knowledge, for example? Right. So that is, so the idea is that, all these, so to say, bodies, and that is what also his ideal is, that they are somehow at a certain level also harmonized to each other. Or how should we think of a harmonization between all those different ideas, different practices? How can they be about a global society, for example? So one way to think about this is about this noise, right? So they all relate to a certain way to so they filter noise through signals. They all hear the same noise, but they have different signals.
Yeah, they have different ways from cultural understanding these noises, for example. Yeah, and they all hear the same. Yeah, so they are. They relate. So they are translating noise into signals. Yeah. So this is this is a very general structure of thinking about these, and it's not only people. So but also. Laptops, for example. So they select data that they show us on the screen, for example. So that the program is that the program projects to us. Yeah. So what a laptop and a mobile phone is doing is that it receives information, it translates it, and it emits it to us. Yeah, and that is the same thing as that what we are doing as well. So we receive noises, information, and somehow, so just by thinking, for example, but also by gesturing, by using our body, we translate this information and we send this to the world again. And also that is also what planets are doing, for example, or rivers, for example.
Right.
Trees. So what he what he's aiming at is developing an object philosophy. So all things are rather objects instead of subjects. So the phenomenological or the Kantian tradition. So that philosophy should be developed to understanding consciousness or subjectivity is surrounded by objects. Yeah. But Serres is more like, so he's not giving up subjectivity. So it is very important. So what I said about global intuition, right? So that can be very subjective. That is dependent on the person who you are. So what kind of global intuition you have. But as a sort of philosophy, he tries to say, all right, so we should think the subjectivity as a communication between objects. So how do we commute to other people, to technology, and to nature, for example? Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I just noticed how I'm listening to you. I'm making connections between some other philosophers I know, but also my own experience, and I'm gonna take some time to take a coffee and
sure.
think about what you do. Can I get you anything?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, I have my coffee. I was thinking while waiting for my coffee that. So first of all, he sounds like an interdisciplinary philosopher, which I'm very interested in. I had so many thoughts about what you said because there's so much in there already. I had a question. I can give you my own answer, but my question is: so if you are interested in so many different things, so you're not specialized in, let's say, astrophysics or something like that. How do you keep everything together rather than just? Which I guess is more multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary is maybe you're a doctor, but you're also an athlete.
Yeah.
But that's what you do in your free time.
Yeah.
And then you go to work, and then you're a doctor. But when you're on your bike, you're not a doctor. And this is also, kind of the reason behind starting this podcast and tying it to Plato's allegory of the cave, because I think you do need a kind of a framework. Yeah. But this framework, again, like the bubble we just talked about, it has to be kind of flexible. You have to be able to move it around, but at the same time, it has to kind of resist as well, because then you get a dialogue. So that's why, I guess the next question is, how would Sarah read Plato's allegory of the cave? Because that's something that we've discussed already for, I don't know, almost 30 episodes. Yeah. And that's kind of a way that if you give me your answer, because of course you're not Michel Serres, but you're also, we can get to that later, you're also using him in a way.
Yeah, all right, so interesting. So, a lot to be said about interdisciplinarity, but maybe let's first delve into the cave and then we can think about...
So we establish kind of a framework, then we have an idea, okay, this is his way of interpreting the cave. Yeah. And then we can move on from there.
Yeah, so it's actually very funny that your podcast is about the cave, because he has, at certain places in his work, he has reactions to this thinking of Plato. Oh, great. Yeah, and also about the cave metaphor. So what he does actually, one of the most striking responses to this is his counter example, and this he owes from the work of Jules Verne. So these adventure and science fiction writers. And so Jules Verne has a book. It's in English. It's The Vanished Diamond. So I haven't read it. I only know it from Serres. But and there you have two men, Victor and Pharamond, and they are lower. So they are miners, I think, but they are lowered into an underground cavern. So what they discover there, so what they see is not the sun, or the shades, as in Plato's cave, But what they discover there is because they have lights, so that and also that the ground is covered with all kinds of glows of diamonds, for example. So these are rubies, emeralds, all kinds of colors, all kinds of stones, right? So there's very fine grades actually the cave, and so the light is not only coming from outside, but the light is reflecting
through the diamonds and minerals,
and it's flashing back all the colors of the rainbow actually. So what they see is also sort of showers of brilliancy, for example. And thousands of prisms that they discover there. So all kinds of sort of lights, colors, shades within that cave. So they find it an astonishing combination of light and color what they find in that cave. So not something that they want to leave, for example. So this is a sort of kind of a counter example of Serres. So what he tries to do is also relating his philosophy to this Jules Verne example instead of setting it against Plato's philosophy. Or about a way of thinking about what philosophy should do. So so it's not about his philosophy, but developing a sort of philosophy.
What is the job of philosophy?
So what are other ways to think about what philosophy should do? So, for example, now we can discuss a couple of differences of the Plato's cave and the Jules Verne's cave. So one of them would be that in Plato's story, the cave is something that holds us captive, right? So that is so we should get out of the cave, and so Verne is more positive in that sense about that cave. So that it is, the two men are so they are sort of lost into that cave. So like a star.
So rather than being taken out of the cave, they're lowered into it.
So it's like when you see a starry sky, for example, at night. So then you're amazed by that. So it's not something that you want to leave. So it tells you something about how things work. And then there are a lot of different colors, a lot of different stars.
But so far, because the prisoners in Plato's cave, they don't want to leave either. Because they don't. Even when someone wants to, that he has to be dragged up kicking and screaming. But Plato's message then would be, they should be, because they're not aware. They're not aware of the life at the surface. But in Jules Verne, they are aware of the life of the surface, and they find the cave more beautiful, maybe.
More beautiful, more interesting, more diffracted. And also another difference is then that Plato's philosophy is then about the single sun, right? The glory of that single sun. So there's one kind of truth, or so that we that everyone should learn, for example, and we should leave all the so we should leave the cave behind us. So that is his message. And so in Verne's cave, then you have not one single sun, but you have like 1,000 glimmers, nocturnal glimmers, for example. So there are a lot of things that can teach us about the world. So there's not one single truth, right? So there are a lot of ways of. So this is also linking to your interdisciplinarity. So there's a lot of ways of gathering knowledge or being receptive. That is. That teaches us something about the world. So that gives us knowledge. And also, in Plato, so there's one. It's about one person that gets freed and who finds the sun, right? Mm-hmm. So there's one person. So it's a bit of a message to. So that knowledge is something that you, so as a person, should strive for. Mm-hmm. And here, in Vernus Cave, that's interesting that there's two Voyagers, right? So they're twin lights, so they multiply the reflections of the cave. Yeah. Right. So there's also some.
So they can share. They can share as well. They can speak about it.
Yeah, there's communication about knowledge. So there's a communication about the cave, and they together, people together gather knowledge. Yeah, so and also the role of the shadows is very important. So, for example, the sun in Plato, the central sun is driving us away from the the central sun is driving us away from the shadows that we can find in the cave. Mm-hmm. But actually in Serres and also in Verne, so that we need shadows and diffractions of lights to see. So only the sun would blind us. Yeah, so that is an...
That's one of the most fascinating aspects of the cave is, as Mika Ball said it, I think in episode 3, is you can't look... So in the allegory, he looks directly at the sun.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you go blind.
Yes,
absolutely. My own idea about is that because vision is such a theme in being blinded by the light. So in the beginning, he's blinded by the light. He cannot see. After a while, he starts to see him more and more.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that Plato put that in by mistake, because everything until that point in the cave is about eyes and being sensitive to the light. And then he describes something. So far, you can connect the cave to what you could do in real life. I mean, you could imagine, okay, if I was locked up in a cave and I would look at the fire, it would blind me, but then I would go out on the surface, it would be even more blinding, but after maybe a few days, I would see the stars. So there he does see the stars, but first he sees the stars at night. But then after his eyes get more, he can look during the day, then he sees the sun. Yeah. So the stars are in there, but they're not...
Yeah.
So then he sees the sun.
Yeah.
And then he can look at the sun. So he's saying something at that point. The allegory is also showing its own limits.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's something interesting.
And I think Plato put that in there as a way to show. Well, the allegory is not the whole. Way. It's not the whole way of understanding.
No, I think so. This allegory is if you propose it as a sort of model of knowledge. Yeah, so how to gather knowledge, right?
Right, but I think that you have the Platonists who interpreted Plato. Yeah. But I don't think that this is just my personal thing of looking at it, is that I see Plato mainly as a teacher and a writer, and people after him have tried to kind of make this philosophical system, which then was hugely influential in the history of philosophy, and then later philosophers responded not so much to Plato's text, except maybe Serres and Heidegger and some other people who go back really to the text, but they respond to the interpretations of this allegory. Speaking of noise.
So it's what I already said. Also, it's about more like it's not about the text itself, right? So it's like a Platonic model of knowledge. So how this gives an idea of what knowledge of the world is about, and what we learn over and over again. So we should, for example, this is also a sort of educational message also in so we should be blinded before we can learn, for example, so that the learning is painful, for example. So that is also some messages that are in there, and also that the world of sensitivity, and the bodily world is actually is something we should not strive for. So it's like the world of the soul, or the world of the mind, that is the world of the brain that is more important. So this is what Serres is criticizing.
Right. But then, so in my understanding, that would be more critique of Platonism.
Yeah.
Because if you, for instance, Plato says that when the prisoner stands up and he turns around, he says he must turn the whole body. So it's not enough to just turn the head, but you have to turn the whole body.
Yeah, beautiful.
And the whole thing is about, instead of like he sees things, he is in pain, he's struggling.
Yeah.
It's all these like physical sensations. So is that something that would be more aligned with Serres, like the physical part of it? Or would he emphasize that more?
Yeah, absolutely. So he has a couple of books also about, about embodiment and sensitivity. Yeah. And that is also what links up to the tennis player on beforehand. But about that cave, so I think the most important message, so that Serres wants to establish with this example of Jules Verne's novel, is that. Right, so there's not one central light. So that is, so he has multiple places. That's a theme in this work. So we shouldn't think of the world or the universe as organized around a center. Whether it's being the subject or consciousness, or the sun, for example, or the earth in Aristotelian astrology. So that's. So we shouldn't think about, so this is the center and there's the periphery. So in Serres' philosophy, everything is sort of a sort of a center.
Depending on the moment or your focus.
Yeah, so he has this, in one of his books, his most clear examples is that, so he was a rugby player. And then he explains his theory, and that is... explains his theory of the an important concept is the quasi object. So that is an object that guides people's behavior, for example, and this is also taken up by people like Latour, for example. So that and what he So this example is about rugby and of football, that the ball is guiding the movements of the players, right? So to be a football player then is actually be attentive to the ball. Yeah. So be a subject is then to be subjected to the ball, right? So it's not self-immanent subject. So that's
like Kantian subject, autonomous, making your own, considering different possibilities. But if you're a rugby player, you can consider your possibilities, but the ball is there, so you have to move there.
Yeah, exactly. So you have this also in phenomenology, so that the subject is sort of grounding the world, right? So that but here, so Serres' example is that, so here the ball is really the subject. And
so quasi-object means that it's an object but also a subject.
Yeah. So it's an object that doesn't want to be an object. So we think as object as something that we can manipulate, that we can determine, that we can. Its behavior of its objects should be foreseeable for us. But that's something that Serres says, is that nature is never that way. So it's objects produce noises, produce shadows, for example. So they are not fully transparent, and also they remain, they remain a bit of also a bit out of human control. For example, the ball, which is fabricated, but it's never foreseeable what it does. Yeah.
I'm just getting this strong image. So we have to rewind a little bit, like a week or something, just after the Dutch lost the game with the penalties. Yeah. And just the context, if people listen to this in 50 years. So the idea was that, it was like 2-2, Argentina-Holland. Yeah. And there were, I don't know, these verlenging football terms. So they had to play longer. And then what people said is that Van Gaal, the Dutch coach, he they were actually quite good at the end of the regular play time. But he told them to dial back a little bit, like instead of like putting all their energy in trying to score in the verlenging, because he wanted to do the penalties. But why? Because he had devised this whole system of how the Dutch finally are going to win the penalty. Yeah. So I just had this image that because many people gave their opinion on it. I was wondering if they would have asked you for commentary on that aspect.
Yeah. So I think so. That's the so Sarah's also some comments about sports and so one of his ideas is that it gives us especially modern football gives us the idea that it is manageable, right? So that is foreseeable. How we should play, for example, and also coaches give us these impressions. So, for example, Van Gaal. And but so he's really much against this. Sporting teaches us something very, very, very different. Namely that the world is not deterministic, for example. So it's more like chaotic. And so how should we deal with this chaotic world? So that is all every time that's different every time. So we have this idea, and that is also what you not only see in sports, but also, for example, in economic ideas. So that. For example, in surveillance capitalism, for example, that is also in the books of Harari that behavior of people is somehow manageable, right? So that's somehow predictable, and of course, in some sense, it is that way, but this is also, according to Serres, these ideas are based on a sort of deterministic worldview, which was really prominent in this. So in early modern societies, right? So that the world is. Constituted like a clockwork, for example.
And you just have to find this organizing principle, this central sun, and once you find this central sun, then everything else makes sense to you. So delving to Serres a bit more, is that it's also really opening up for this unpredictability of the world, and so also about this global intuition is not about getting it right about the future, but being sensitive or being open to more futures that can come. So this is a really interesting alternative. So, for example, to these ideas from Silicon Valley, where said that should predict, that are. So we in the future we are going to another planet, for example, and then we all behave like this, and so there's only one. It's a close future, so it's one scenario. Maybe. If we all believe in that, and if we all believe those stories, then then it would be a probable scenario. But it's really, so this global intuition is about more. So he has also, this is interesting. So he has this sporting example from the goalkeeper. That is, he was a goalkeeper himself in his youth, and that is, And he was a rugby player.
And a goalkeeper and a mountaineer. And so the goalkeeper is waiting for a free kick. So a free kick from the other team, and so what he says about the goalkeeper is that what the goalkeeper should do is try to be sensitive to multiple kicks, right? So that can be in the left corner or in the right above corner, or just. So
the future could be, it's not determined yet, but it could be multiple possibilities.
Yes. So the goalkeeper is one one node, so to say, one star in the middle of multiple stars, right? So we should be attentive to more futures, to more directions, and this is also this links to his idea. So there's not one central truth, for example, but it's more like opening up the lineages, the threads between multiple domains of thought, so to say.
So just to stay with this example, because I really like this. This is really my own background is in cultural analysis from also Mika Ball, where she always says as well, for your analysis, and we can speak maybe about what is analysis later, but you need an object. That object speaks back to you. So you can so this is another way we use now, like the penalties situation in soccer, because it's kind of this object that people who are listening to this, they can imagine this, and we can speak about it, and in this way we can learn about Serres' philosophy. So again, some of the comments on the World Cup, the last Dutch game with Argentina, about penalties is that either you control it. So what they had this plan of intimidating players, they had this whole strategy, which obviously didn't work, or it's a lottery. So it's 50-50. Yeah. So it's like, it seems like this dichotomy. Either penalties is something you can control, or it's you don't have any influence. So is there, for Serres, it seems like there's kind of a middle way. So I would say in the modern World Cup, so that nowadays, it's very difficult to refrain from this perspective that you can control, so that you can know in what corner the penalty shooter will be shooting, so in order to win, it might be needed to know. So there's also the you study the statistical probability that Messi always chooses.
So, and if this is the case, then Serres' question would be if this is still, if we can still disregard this as a sport, right? So that but also so if we pick up on this way of thinking about the World Cup, there are also afterwards it can be it makes really perfect sense why Argentina won the World Cup, but on beforehand it doesn't make sense. For example, before, when they were playing to the Netherlands, they were not considered as to be that great. Okay, so they had Messi, but so we should also be open to a lot of unpredictable things in this football game, and they can teach us about how we should how to deal with unpredictability. So also football players. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of passes, unforeseen red cards, for example, noises from the stadium that are really important in describing the development of the game. That after all, it was all necessary, but Serresian interpretation would then also be that we should look for the chaotic elements, for the noisy elements, right? So that are not predictable, but also and how but they are always there. So there's not So entropy, for example, or noise is always there. So it's not. So if we think it's deterministic, it's becoming more and more deterministic. I would argue for. So
you can rank the I don't know if you said it or someone else, but if you want to know who wins. Not the international, but I don't know anything about football. But like the Champions League, you just have to list who has the most money.
Yes,
and then you can pretty much predict who's going to.
That's a development. That's a very pessimistic. He's very pessimistic about this development, and also so more or less that market value determines the value of the player, for example, right? So that So then you're making it deterministic, and you only want to hear this deterministic language about football. Yeah.
So if this is an example of what sports should not be like, what should it be like?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, and that is actually what my research is about. So how can we think about sports for the future? So that is not guided by financial interest, for for example. Also not about
That's one of the things that the football players, when they're interviewed, say is that once you play in this league, all the fun goes away.
Yeah.
Because it's not even about winning or losing, but it's also you have to play like beautiful football, and so we have to take this money out of the equation if you want to do real sport.
Yeah, but it's not only money. So there are also a lot of ideas about how sport should be. So, for example, that it should promote our health, for example, right?
Yeah.
So, and then it's more like instrumentalistically. So, for example, the government is interested in this, so to lower the hospital costs, for example, so that we should all move and so to live longer, for example. So this is also a bit of idea about sports. So how
like we should be like hamsters, like going to the fitness so that we have enough energy to go to our jobs.
And so then what is really is also it's a bit of bit of instrumentalizing sports for something else, for health, or for money, then, or for. So you have older ideas about sports that it should be about building a character, for example, or to know pain.
That's a very Greek idea too, right? Like the athlete as this like all-round human being.
Yes. Absolutely, yeah. So Serres' analysis is that because of these ideas, we are a bit struck in our way of thinking about sports, and therefore sports is becoming more and more unhealthy to him. That we read this also in interviews with former athletes, for example, that they should be egoistic to for a certain performance to win the gold medal, for example. And
there's only one winner. Maybe this also relates to this one organizing principle is like the best.
Yes.
Who is the best?
Yes. So it's about it's only only the winner. Yeah. So sport should be about winning, for example. So only the winner makes sense. Yeah. And then you have some beautiful examples. So beautiful. Quotes from Serres as well, so that's the loser is actually the most important. So the most people are losers. So there's only one winner. So we should think about how can we beautifully lose, for example, right? So that would be, and also so the idea is that so we talked about football is that our dinosaurs, so global companies are taking up these sports. So sports are becoming dinosaurs, for example, but they will be extinct for Serres. So he's really interested in what's small sports, so like mosquitoes are popping up, right? So that are developing nowadays in multiple cultures.
Would he consider like gaming a sport, like e-games? I guess it's one of the biggest sports in the world that most people, maybe people listening to this, are not even aware of, but it's really big.
Good question, but I have my doubts about this. So there are I think two criticism on esports can be so it's one that is also surveillance capitalism. So that's what the game developers try to do is develop an algorithm that lets people more even more game, and so that so
capture attention.
So there's a lot of addiction. That's the danger for this, and it's not only certain people, but a lot of people are addicted to.
So the winners are the ones that make money playing this, and most people are like the addicts. That are the losers.
Absolutely. So the winners are the big companies, the game developing companies. Right. Yeah. So not the one who's first on the list, but actually who gains the most money by selling those games. Yeah. And another criticism that you can have from a Serresian perspective would be about the role of the body in esports. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of these ideas is that the body has multiple layers, but he always directs his attention to the sensitivity. So, for example, with listening that we already talked about, with seeing, but also with smelling and feeling. Yeah. So that, and it's not something that the body does for Serres, but it's something that the body actually is as an information processor. Yeah, so by seeing or by hearing, we create a sort of body, right? So our brain is developing, for example. So it's not something that a certain function of our body, but by getting in contact to the world, for example, then. Also, our body grows with that. So that you can see evolutionary is also, in evolutionary ways is also the case. So and one criticism that he's had against this Netflix idea and this gaming, the growing of these sedimentary lifestyles is that we develop another body, which which is confronted with obesity, for example, right? So in this sense, he would link up with this idea of so that also we should. So, for example, that in education, physical education would be very important for Serres. So his book Variations on the Body opens with the quote to my gymnastic instructors who taught me how to think. So it's not, So
he didn't learn to think from his mathematics teachers or his philosophy teachers, but from his gymnastic teachers.
Yes. So for example, how we can imagine that is also like the goalkeeper, so that it is anticipating multiple futures, so to say. And we also learn to play together, for example, in when learning gymnastics, and also to refrain from violence when we're doing sports, for example, and also about counting and about knowing to learn your body, and knowing how your body is structured. So that you.
Did he say anything? Because this all for me connects to martial arts as well, especially. You have this with judo, but also I'm practicing Tai Chi, and there one idea is also about. So you train. So when you woke a form, they say you should woke it like you're fighting with somebody, but you're not. But they also they're not. They don't like competition in Tai Chi in the sense of they do have it, but or judo you have that as well. But it's the idea of you don't have a competition, but you're getting to know your body, but you're also it's very much about dealing with what comes at you and with the world and remaining stable and did he write about martial arts? This is so great about this philosopher. I can ask you, did he write about this and this?
Not explicitly. Not that I know of, but in his Variations on the Body, you have some hints that you can. So one way, for example, with yoga, for example, then what is learning? How can you learn with your body? And one way of the thinking about this is that when doing sports or when doing Tai Chi, you are imitating. So, for example, with yoga, you are imitating a mountain, for example, or a cow. So, what this actually says is that. So his book is called Variations on the Body. So what you learn by sports is variations knowing variations of being a body. So it's not one body. So it's actually more bodies that you develop when practicing, when training, for example. So that so this is against this deterministic idea, so that the body can be guided, by the brain, for example, or by an algorithm. What Serres is actually aiming at is that there is not one deterministic body, but that we develop more, variations of being a body. So this is almost neglected in the philosophical tradition. So then you have just one.
Just one. Again, this idea of a one central organizing principle.
Yeah.
So just to summarize a little bit to make sure I understand. I mean, I don't understand it, but it's more. Wow, these are fascinating ideas to explore. Like one is that you say that by listening, by seeing, this is not just something the body does or information that comes into the body and processes, but this is actually one way in which the body, it's part of the body.
Yes.
And the other part is that we don't just have a single body.
Yeah.
But which is actually an idea I subscribe to as well, but I would see it slightly, I don't know, differently. But we have different bodies.
Yeah.
Because I personally, I would... No, let's stay with Serres for a moment.
So this is... So about his multiple bodies, it's what he says is the body more than that it is actual, it's virtual. The body we can think about. So he has this fascinating example with the hand. So the hand has not only one function, but we can think of it as we can play piano with the hand. We can knock someone with the hand.
Use sign language.
Yes, we use so. There's no one.
Play esports.
Play esports, yeah. So this is actually a good model to think about the body. So for example, when Darwin writes about the hand, so he talks about one function that we can do with the hand, right? But Serres actually it's not one function; it's one of multiple. So it's the function of the hand is rather virtual, so it can do everything in potential, and so it's about developing multiple variations to deal with our body. So that is also but we can also do calculations with our body. So for example, when my daughter, she is 7 years, and she counts with her fingers, for example, right? So that's not only that we should a hand is not only that's something that we should use for workmanship, for example, but we can also do complex calculations with our hands. Also weaving is an important concept in so by using our hands for weaving, then there are a lot of multiple, complex mathematical problems coming up when weaving, for example.
Well, in Tai Chi, the hands are very important, actually, because you use your whole body. So they say in Tai Chi, you have two options. Either the whole body is still or the whole body is moving, and there's nothing in between. So, for instance, if you push somebody, then I'm just showing like I sit still and I push. But in Tai Chi, I would actually stand, but I would go with the whole, it starts in the feet, but it's concentrated in the hands. So you wouldn't be even able to look at the hands in isolation. And the other part is that the hands respond. So if you catch a ball, it's completely intuitive. You don't think about, I'm now going to close my hands, because this message takes too long to go from your brain to your hands. So it's not the brain that tells the hand to catch the ball, but the hands respond.
So, and this also very links to Serres in his Les Cinq Sens, or the five senses, where he talks about feeling, for example, that you feel at certain places with your body. So, for example, when kissing, then the consciousness resides in your lips, for example, or when touching someone. So then, or being touched, for example, with a physiotherapist, then your consciousness is on your back, for example. So it's really. So it's not one central point. So the body, consists of multiple bodies. So to say that we can develop multiple layers. He calls it, and also he devotes a central role to the skin. So developing a sensitive skin. Yeah, and so that would be an argument against esports. So you get more sensitive thumbs,
Your
for
thumbs become
example.
very sensitive, yeah.
But so it's not it's not an all encompassing argument.
Yeah.
But so his work gives some hints about how to think about modern trends in society. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your own relation to Serres, because I don't really know how you. What was your entry point in his philosophy? Can you speak a little bit about your own background?
Yeah. So I was basically I have studied philosophy and artificial intelligence. So I wrote my master thesis about philosophy of the brain. And one of the conclusions of my thesis was that in order to understand the brain, then we should look more closely to how it is structured inside the body. So how we mostly what we see is that also in neuroscience they have basically a sort of Cartesian model of the human body, so that the brain is a kind of puppet player for the rest of the body, right? So everything has to pass our brain. And if we want to understand ourselves, then we have to look inside our brain. And you see that in a lot of research programs, this idea happening. So, and I was really against it also from philosophy. So I read already Merleau-Ponty, for example. So the philosopher, who also has a bit of, developed an idea of how we should conceptualize the body. So it's not only an object for a surgeon, for example, or it's not, but it's also the body is also so that we are and that we experience the whole time. So it's not only an object but also a subject. So the body subject.
A lived body and a physical body.
The physical body, or the anatomical body, for example, and the felt body or the experienced body. But but Merleau-Ponty was already very popular also in embodied cognitive science. So there were a lot of people working on ideas that Merleau-Ponty had in 1940s. And I was interested in sports, and I was also cycling myself. So that is why I also try to use my own experiences for thinking about embodiment.
Oh, that's fascinating. But that's when you didn't know Serres yet. So you were
at the time not
on your bike in a competition as well? Or?
Yes, yeah.
So can you describe what? So you're on your bike in the competition. Yeah. What are you thinking about? That at the moment, or is it an analysis later?
No, actually, so when reading Merleau-Ponty, for example, or philosophy, then also these experiences that you have on the bike, you related to these ideas from the books that you've read. So how would Merleau-Ponty think about this?
Can you give an example?
So for example, for understanding the body, we also need to. So Merleau-Ponty's analysis of the body and within a sportive context is that so when you train and when you're a skillful athlete, then you see more possibilities for action. So then you see then you feel the direction of the goal, for example, and you see the gap between two defenders,
so
for example.
Already that idea of noise, that you are able to see small details that other people would not even be aware of.
Yeah. So here in Merleau-Ponty, the body is a sort of bridge between you and the world, right? So you can so when developing skills, it makes you more sensitive to the world in a certain way. But almost absent in Merleau-Ponty is the feeling of one's own body. So how do we feel pain, for example, or myself breathing, for example, which are very real experiences in sporting contexts. And so I saw some hints in Merleau-Ponty, but I think there are also a lot of questions that are unanswered there. And so that's when I read in a philosophy of sports book this example of the goalkeeper of Serres, and so that we just described, and I find it beautiful. So I tried to find more works of him, and I said, Michel Serres body. I looked for it, and and then I came to his work, The Five Senses, Les Cinq Sens, and he gave an interview to Bruno Latour, and there he says it very explicitly. So it's really about this idea of the body in Merleau-Ponty that I wanted to criticize. So that's why I was interested. So in what ways are you criticizing Merleau-Ponty? How can we have a sort of ideas behind Merleau-Ponty, for example?
That's one of the most amazing things, when you're thinking about something. It's not just your work, like philosophy. You're thinking about it while you're cycling, and you have this philosopher that kind of shows you some things, but you also think, well, he is at the limits. What do I do with it? And then you discover this person who spent so much, who actually wrote a book about it already. I mean. That's one of the joys, right?
It was very beautiful, but also very difficult. So it was very difficult to read, but also very beautifully written. So it was at one hand, his work was very attractive, but on the other hand, we find it very annoying.
Did you read it in French?
At last, so I first read it in English. And afterwards, so when I was reading Serres a bit more, I had to learn to read French. So that afterwards.
That's funny. You listened to my episode with Peter Lemmens, right? So he said that he also, when he started to read Heidegger, that's when he started to learn German as well.
So that's So there are a lot of.
So you speak. If you are in France, do people understand you, or do you have these complex Serrerian?
No, normal. So when I go to the university there and chat with people there, so they speak in French to me, and I speak in English back. But that goes very well. It's a bit of the same themes that we are talking about. So it's very understandable for me if they speak in French, because I've read.
You have the same reference, even though you can speak the language. You have a passive,
So that's
so that opened up something. Which what did he open? What did he answer at the time? The question that you had.
There were a lot of answers in this book, but one that strikes me the most was that his last chapter in The Five Senses is about joy, so about pleasure. So and that you wouldn't read in. I haven't read it in Merleau-Ponty, for example. So that bodily experience go together with a certain kind of joy, and also moving together, for example. That even moving makes us lighter in that sense. So our body feels lighter when we move. So when things are going well. And that you see, and I read that when my daughter was growing up. So she was 2 or 3 years old, and I saw it with her, so that she is jumping on the bed, for example, and experiencing joy from that, and also from running. So she was. This is also what Serres says, that you first you learn how to run and then how to walk.
Oh,
right?
That's beautiful. That's how it is. And then we have to, and then we learn how to walk, and then we have to motivate ourselves to learn to run.
Absolutely. So there's so that's, and I learned this also when I was doing research to with patients in psychiatry and also in medical contexts. And I found this is an important dimension of being a body. So this is very important. So some patients wouldn't, they feel disembodied because they can't experience joy anymore. Yeah, and so they're disconnected to their bodies. Yeah, so that's and also what you find always in Serres is complex mathematical thought. So it dealt me also a bit to mathematics, and
because besides being a rugby player and what else did we say?
Mountaineer.
And he was also a mathematician.
Yes, and a sailor. A mathematician. And also someone who studied classical philology, so he knows
the philosophy, but how to interpret like the knowledge of philosophers, right? The study of philosophers.
Yeah, but more like more like classical languages. So
the Greek
and there's also a lot of mythology in his work. So I wasn't very familiar with this in philosophy, right? So there's a lot of how to use mythology or biblical text for understanding something, and that is also this can be a bit difficult because you really know what the passage of Homer was about. But he has also a lot of works about fairy tales, about La Fontaine, for example. So then you have short fairy tales that he says, all right, so this is about noise. This is about how I think about noise. So that was also that very much attracted me to his work more. And also that there was no single backbone to understand his work, but that it is more constructed as a kind of network, right? So it has all relationships to multiple things, so multiple concepts. And in every book you see, all right, so that I read already in another book from him, but here he's taking another direction and finding new ways of thinking about linkages between mythical texts and philosophical texts, for example.
But does it have to do with? So I know Bernard Stiegler. I know him more, and he's also a French philosopher. Yeah. He also has many talents. He even was a bank robber.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
And he also paid attention to the body and the brain, but how the brain evolves in connection with technology, and how this, in early human history, this was kind of in sync because we had a lot of time to adapt to tools and everything, but now it's different. So I see some links there, but I also see a link that, for instance, in Techniques and Time, Stiegler's, it's called the myth of, something with Prometheus. So he also uses a myth, and when philosophers do that, so sometimes it's criticized for, but like a classical approach would be like Spinoza, like it's actually the mathematical approach, right? This is the first theorem, these are my lemmas and everything. But I always have the feeling with these philosophers that they want to express something and they could say it directly, but they choose not to. Because if they would say it directly, somehow it wouldn't communicate. And so instead they try to give you a kind of experience, rather than, so more like they're constructing a building that you can walk around in, and then discover something which they want to show you, rather than what's the other, like just showing you a path to walk or something. So that I wonder with Serres, who is obviously so multi-talented and intelligent, didn't he ever say, well, actually, I've been writing about all these different topics, but it all comes down to this?
No,
Or is there something about it? It seems to have something to do also with communication and the role of philosophy. That you sometimes the way to say things as direct and simple as possible is not the way to do it. Sometimes you have to take a detour.
Yeah, you have to take a detour, indeed, and it is also in line with his transversal interdisciplinary method. So there's no single dictionary, for example, to look for when we should understand. We should understand the body, for example. But there's a lot. So not only look at the anatomical book, but also how is the body used in mythology, for example, or in sports. So these are also important. And also, what kind of figures can the body imitate? So, for example, then we also need to look at mathematics, for example. So, what kind of parables can the body make, for example? So that is very important in Serres, that you see this kind of linkages or threads between disciplines that are supposedly far from each other. And so about mythology, he says, so there's only one mythology that there is that there can be a science without myths. So that science itself is a sort of way of
It's the mythology that doesn't recognize it's a mythology.
Yes, So it's very important for science, but it needs to be aware of its, ultimate generalistic statements. So that it can claim a separate knowledge about the world, so that you can't find in other domains. So that's not the case for Serres. So science opens up threats to, so also by using words, for example, then it picks also from other domains of knowledge to make things clear. And so when observing or when doing science, then we are already using concepts from other domains. So, for example, nowadays we are in a lot of sciences are using concepts from the computer domain. So about coding, for example. So the DNA code, for example, and there's also and about working on our brain is like reprogramming our brain, right? So
even in everyday language as well. This is where I did some study on how people speak about pain, and they always use, just because you referred to it earlier, they always use kind of metaphors to speak about pain, because it's as Wittgenstein said, it's not I can show you my pain. I always have to use words, and these words have to be shared, while the pain is something I only feel. So it's always like the body as a mechanism or something that's broken, or something that like the signals or the wires are crossed or something like that.
So mythology can also be really attentive. So if we say, all right, so there's also a bit of mythology in here, so that in the most, so to say, recent projects, recent techno-scientific project, there are a lot of archaic ideas in this, for example,
That's a great point, because that's kind of, to stick with the computer metaphor. It's like you're running new softwares, but you're still using Windows 3.1. So I think this is one of the things that interdisciplinary philosophy can do, is because you have these kind of, Iris van der Tuin said it like that, like thinking, or she had it from someone else, like thinking moves. So for instance, reasoning, you make certain moves, or what if this is like this is another move. And it's also, if you want to think about the brain or sports or health or something like that, you kind of need to update your moves as well.
So this is also, I think, a bit of going back to this global intuition idea, so that reasoning really should be performative or transformative in this. So it's really, so when we think about this, we should really situate ourselves different than before in the world. So it's really also transforming ourselves in that way, and that is why it also links to using your body, for example. So you have a different body when you trained, for example. This is also his mathematical background, so that he says it's not we should think of mathematics not as something as universal rules that we can then apply deductively, but it's more like mathematics as a sort of procedure, as a sort of recipe that gives some hints about knowing how to go on, but it's not determined at all. So it's only helping us, finding clues or finding ladders for overcoming a certain problem. But we really shouldn't think of mathematics in a Serresian way as a sort of as fast standard axioms that we can apply to certain
the Platonist, like the ideal forms that are unchanging.
Absolutely.
And once we have discovered the mathematical principles of the universe, then from there we can deduce everything.
Yeah.
So just to go back to your own story, because you got into Serres. So how did you then? How did this feed back into your work? Because you were studying at the time.
Actually, I was writing a popular book on philosophy and sports. Yeah. So, and I really began with phenomenology. So that was my link to what is a lived experience in sports, and then I used Merleau-Ponty and also this Dutch phenomenologist Buitendijk, for example, to understand that, and they were really helpful in certain ways. But also, but I tried to develop these ideas more further because they were a bit of old-fashioned as well, and they were not dealing with our environmental issues, for example, or with technology. So that is why Serres came in. And also I used also Peter Sloterdijk for understanding this, but Serres became then the main influence for the book.
And the book is Wij zijn ons lichaam in Dutch, and it really should be translated in English. We are our body, if any publishers are listening to this.
Yeah, so there will be a French translation of one chapter. But so that's why I came to know Serres, and I use it first as just one source, but later on it became the main source for developing ideas about sports. And afterwards, I had many interesting criticisms on my book, or many interesting comments on my book. So that was really interesting. People from the field of sports or from the field of neuroscience, from physiotherapy, they were really interested in how they can use these ideas. So that's why I applied for a PhD trajectory on basically on developing a sort of philosophy of sports, movement, and the body. So how can we think those three together? And using Serres as a main influence for that, and also bit of trying to describe the differences with Merleau-Ponty, for example, who is a bit of influential in philosophy of medicine, but also in physiotherapy and movement sciences. There you have the phenomenological approach to these. So in reaction to the mechanical approach, but I think we should develop these ideas a bit more further, and Serres can really help us with that. And then you have to also in phenomenology, that you have a really distinction between the lived, so the first person experience and the scientific approach to the human body, for example. And this is not what you would find in Serres. He would always look for links between these approaches, and that is, I find this really helping us. So not reducing the body to, for example, activation patterns in the brain, but taking these activation patterns as a starting point, or thinking about experience, and also relating it to, for example, novels, or so that we can find combinations between multiple disciplines for understanding a more fine-grained and more complex story of what the body is. And this is what I try now to translate into sports science and also in the hospital. So try to translate this to how can we use these concepts of health or of the body in medical contexts. So that
what are some of the insights that you give, for instance, if you're speaking to physiotherapists or doctors?
So with physiotherapists, I am busy with sort of body images. So what are kind of images that we standardly have on the body? And so one idea is that you have this idea from Dick Swaap's or from neuroscience, is that the body is structured by the brain.
Yeah, so he wrote a book, it's influential in Holland, called Wij zijn ons brein, We Are Our Brain.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's not an accident. Your book was called We Are Our Body.
Yeah. And so I try to develop another perspective, that it is more, this is a Serresian perspective, that the body is more structured by the skin, for example. So how can we take the skin as a sort of organizing principle, so that and then the idea is that the body consists of multiple layers. So there's not one central organ, but an organ itself is a layer in the body, and all these layers communicate with each other through noise, through signals, and so Sarah is saying that there are multiple skins in this case, so multiple layers, right? And this makes also the body more sensitive, so that we can feel our guts, for example. We can feel our own heartbeat that is communicating through the body, right? And but then also it can also bit of help to explain why touching is very important, for example, in the healing process.
And in the pandemic, when they spoke about like huidhonger, like hunger for the skin, for touch.
So a lot of that was a lot of influential for links with Serres here.
I think there's also a lot of applications for medical education. So I think what I'm counting in my head, because I'm working some delay with the episodes. So one was with Laura Farpio about medical education, and we also spoke about how important interdisciplinarity is for medical education. So obviously, doctors learn like the biomedical model of the body. But it sounds like you're working, like how we spoke about before, to kind of upgrade the metaphors and the idea and the mythology that we use into a more sophisticated mythology, rather than so there's one idea of the body that helps you design like a randomized controlled trial and an experiment, which that requires a certain aspect of the body, and this is great because that's how we can cure and prevent many kind of diseases. But if you're sitting there as a physiotherapist and you have another person in front of you, it's a different kind of situation. And maybe I've been thinking about this a lot, but I don't have answers to it, rather than the phenomenological answer, that you also have to pay attention to kind of the experience of the person, and the person, like what is. So you have your instruments or your eyes and your hands as a doctor and your medical instruments, but you also have the feeling of like your intuition about there's something off here or there.
I also in my education I always use also paintings and also novels for getting idea what experience is, what pain is, for example, and discuss these with the medical students and the physiotherapists, and what you can learn and hope to, broaden this vocabulary. So this is So this is one what you will find multiple places in Serres' work. So a lot of very interesting links between exact sciences, natural sciences, and works of arts, for example, that they can really help to illuminate each other. And that was what I find one of the most interesting things. So how can we think of information theory or entropies or difficult concepts, but we can also see it at work in in artworks, for example, or in novels. Yeah, so that these ideas are not very difficult, but yeah. So Serres is always trying to describe, tries to describe them as that everyone can follow them. That's.
So personally, I think I could have enough questions for 2 more hours, but the meeting room we reserved is like finished in 7 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, what's a good way to? And maybe is there something you want to wrap up? And the last question I have is like, where, if people are interested in Serres as I am, because I haven't read anything written by him, where to start?
So. Yeah, to wrap up, there's a lot of things.
We might have to speak in another episode again.
Just
for now.
So we started with this global intuition, right?
Right.
So that I think that is one of the most central.
So it's a global intuition, but it's not the central organizing principle.
It's being intuitive to multiple aspects of the world. So it's opening up different vocabularies.
So if you're a doctor, it's also important to read novels and visit a museum for your medical practice,
absolutely.
not just as a hobby.
So looking at artworks, for example, looking at statues for getting an idea of what the body is. And listening music as well in order to get an idea what pain is, for example. And for starters, so there's one work. So it's a bit of it's a more like overzichtswerk. So it's
Overview.
Overview of his work by Christopher Watkin.
Right.
And it's called Michel Serres, Figures in Thought. And that gives you a very good introduction and overview throughout his whole work. And he has read all his works because he has published more than 80 books.
I looked at this list. It's like I thought almost every year, and sometimes 2 books per year.
Yes. Yeah.
So it just looks like he just started writing and he didn't stop.
Yeah. So we talked about this internet generation, and then he has his book Thumbelina. That's about the internet generation. We talked about music, and he has a book on music as well. So it's called Music. And the 5 senses was for me very, very influential. So. If you're interested in the phenomenology or the philosophy of the body, then you should really read The 5 Senses. It's translated to English. It's from 1985.
Did he do any work on the climate?
Yes,
ecology?
absolutely. Yeah. We didn't touch that, but yes, this is also his book, The Natural Contract, from 1989. It's about environmental problems, and so he was very early with that already.
Maybe next time I can read, for instance, this book, and then we can speak about
would be great.
A specific book.
I'd be happy to do that. So how you are doing a PhD right now? Yes.
Are you doing other things that are related to that?
I'm doing a PhD on sports, philosophy of sports, and I'm researching sports nowadays, so ethics in sports. And also I'm teaching at the medical center in Amsterdam to medical students. Ethics and philosophy, medical philosophy.
And can people hire you or consult with you if
they
absolutely
want to
know more about this?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to get in contact with you. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Let's get out of this aquarium. Thank you for listening. This is an independent educational podcast, and I rely on your support to keep it going. It really helps if you subscribe, give it a rating, and share it with your friends and enemies. Go to livefromplatoscave.com for more episodes and other ways to support.